welcome to NAPOD, where we provide NA speaker meetings and workshops in a podcast. We are an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us to be self-supporting by visiting napod.xyz, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 in the virtual basket. If you're also in AA or have friends that are, please tell them about our other podcast, Sobercast. Sobercast features AA speakers and workshops in the same format as NAPOD. We upload a new speaker every day, and it's easy to subscribe by searching for Sobercast, that's 2 words, on any podcast player app, or go to Sobercast.com. Enjoy the podcast, and thanks for listening.
And I'm an addict. Now that grace. I have to stand up because there's no way that I could sit down and tell you a story about how Narcotics Anonymous has saved my life. And I get emotional when I say that because, and I'm sitting up here, reading the English of all of the readings and getting really emotional and thinking, is this because I'm nervous? And it's not. It's because I'm so filled with gratitude. I have so much gratitude today because Narcotics Anonymous came through on the promise. We have one promise, is what our literature says, and it says that any addict, an addict from Florida, an addict who used to live in New York, an addict who is from Denmark, an addict from anywhere in the world, any addict, short addicts, big addicts, fat addicts, white addicts, black addicts, gay addicts, straight addicts, any addict seeking recovery can do 2 things. One, lose the desire to use. And I never thought that could ever happen with this addict. Lose the desire to use. And more important for me, find a new way to live. And I have today. I have found a new way to live. So there's no way that I could sit and tell you that story. Because I get too emotional and I get too, I'm so excited and passionate. Because Narcotics Anonymous gave me my life back. So I want to say thank you so much to my higher power for giving me a moment of clarity on January 7th, 2007. A moment of clarity. In my life. And I'll tell you that whole story of how I got to that point. But I also want to say that I'm so blessed and filled with gratitude for the welcome that I have experienced. My partner and I, for the minute that we landed, actually the graciousness and the love and the welcoming happened way before we got to the Copenhagen airport and then to Aalborg airport. So I want to say thank you, Peter. I don't know where Peter is. Peter must be in the room, no? There he is. Oh, thank you, Peter. And I really want to give you a big round of applause. I want to thank the convention committee, and it's a lot of work, and sometimes you got to take the brunt of stuff, and but that's what service is about. Sometimes service, we heard it last night from the speaker, but sometimes service isn't so pretty, and sometimes it hurts a little bit, but I want to thank Peter so much, and I want to thank Thomas. Where's Thomas? I want to thank Thomas, because both of them took us around, and they just welcomed us, and they loved us, and they were so kind. And then there was somebody who was translating for me last night, Camila. I think I'm saying that right. Is Camila here in the room? Anyway, yes? She translated for me last night. The whole entire speaker, she just totally translated for me, and that was really, really difficult for her, I know, but I'm just so grateful because I was able to hear a message of hope. So thank you to everyone who has made this moment right now for me to carry the message. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little story about, this addict. this addict's journey. I was born and raised in New York. Big surprise. Brooklyn, New York. A long time ago. And I grew up in Brooklyn to an Italian family. So my ancestors are Italian. And anybody familiar with New York City or Brooklyn, it's kind of a working class neighborhood. And so my father was a bus driver, and everybody, my whole family, for the first 9 years of my life, I had a really good experience. I had a really good childhood. But what I realized, after coming to Narcotics Anonymous and listening to people and reading the literature and doing the fourth step, I realized that from a very early age, I started to escape reality. That like my life on life's terms was like I couldn't handle it, or I didn't want to deal with it, or I didn't like it, so I went to the fantasy world. And so my very first kind of drug of choice was fantasy, and I played a lot of that. I was an only child for 9 years, so I did a lot of talking to myself. And I think that from an early age, that's where the committee started. The committee started to form, because I would talk to myself, and I would have conversations with myself. Life was really awesome in Brooklyn, New York, because I was the center of the universe for my family. And I think that's where my self-centeredness and the disease, we talk about that the core of our disease is self-centeredness. And I think that that's where it kind of formed for me, because that's my family put me up on this big pedestal. And it was the world, revolved around me. And then my brother and sister came along, and I loved them. But my brother, I was a little jealous of. And I was jealous because he seemed to get a lot of the stuff that I didn't get, because he was a boy. And I built up resentments early on. And around the age of 15 years old, I started to realize that there was something really different about me. I didn't quite understand it. I thought it was because I liked girls, but I know now today that it was because I was an addict. And that's what made me different. I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt like a misfit. I felt like nobody was going to like me. I felt like people were going to stigmatize me, or hate me, or not talk to me, or beat me up, or whatever it was. All of the things, all of the fears. We talk about in our literature the triangle of self-obsession. The fear, the anger, and the resentment. And I think that this formed really early on for me, for this addict. Now, I was part of a really Catholic, very religious family. And we would go to church every morning. I went to Catholic school, and I wanted to be a priest. So I wrote a letter when I was 7 years old. I wrote a letter to the Pope. Because us addicts, it's like we always have the exception. It's like the rules don't apply to us. So I wrote to the Pope and I asked the Pope for permission if I could be a priest. I know you don't like girls to be priests, but I would make a really good priest. So the Pope sent me back this thing called a papal blessing, which is like a piece of paper. It's a blessing. And my family, my grandmother, my mother was so excited about it because it was like a big deal to get this papal blessing. But I was like, he didn't answer my question. So I wrote another letter. And he sent me rosary beads that time, the second time around. I say all of that to say that I came from a very religious family. And my belief in God and a higher power, I had it. I had a belief. I had a strong connection with a higher power and a strong connection with my family. But then something happened when I was 15 years old, and this is where the chemical substances started. Because I never felt like I had enough courage to really be who I wanted to be. To really not care how you felt about me. So I used a chemical substance, and it was the very first time that I put a chemical into my body. And of course, I immediately got intoxicated. Immediately. And I fell in love with that feeling. Because that feeling was like, you guys know Popeye, right? You know Popeye and the spinach? Well, that's what it was for me. It was like, all of a sudden now I could talk to people, I didn't feel like socially awkward, I felt like I could escape my reality, and I didn't care. I didn't care what you thought, because I was all set now with my spinach, And so I had a party at my house, and we snuck in all of this alcohol, and there was a girl that I went to school with. It was beautiful, beautiful. And I got up the nerve to kiss her. So I did, kiss her. And more chemicals. Fast forward the cave. I'm on the porch. My mother and grandmother can see, but I don't care. First unmanageability, right? I don't care. Because I don't care about anything now. Nothing's gonna hurt me, nothing's gonna harm me, right? So I continue to make out with this girl on the porch. My grandmother saw her, my mother saw her, and they pulled me out of high school. My using really started at that point, because I started to realize that, I was right about feeling different. I was right that you weren't going to like me. More importantly, now my family was saying they didn't like me. So that this family that I loved, that loved me, that gave me support, that gave me an identity, said they didn't love me anymore. Said that I couldn't be who I was, who I really was. So I continued to use chemicals to try to hide it, to try to have courage about it, to try to not care about it. And ultimately, standing up for who I was, they threw me out. So as a teenager, I was without a home. And I stayed with friends for a while, but, the using just really propelled. And our literature talks about we don't care what you use, how much you use. That's not what this is going to be about. I'm going to tell you that where the chemicals took me eventually was to want to die. But it started really early for me. So it started for me when I was 15 years old, putting that first chemical into my body. Ultimately, my family took me back. But I held a resentment for such a long time. And I walked around like a victim for such a long time. And I used all these chemicals because I could. And because the feelings were so hard to bear that I had to numb them. So now I'm like 23 years old and my family's back in my life. My family's back in my life. Pretty much it was a very short period of time. But in my head, had conjured it up to be my whole life, that they hated me. I'm 23 years old and I joined the NYPD. I joined the police department. At the time it was housing, so we worked in housing projects. And at the age of 23 years old, I found my other spinach. Because now I could wear a uniform, have a gun, have a shield, use whatever chemicals I wanted to use, because it was very socially acceptable. And the progression of my disease, because I suffer from the disease of addiction, which is not only the using of drugs, of mind-altering, mood-altering substances. It's not just about that. It's also about the negative thinking, the perspective on my life, thinking that everything is out to get me, thinking that I'm not going to fit in anywhere, thinking that I have to be somebody who I'm not. And so the NYPD was the best thing possible for my disease. Because I could not only get away with being intoxicated and driving and being like almost in a coma, drinking while on duty, scamming, I don't know if you know what I mean by that, is what's the word for cheating the NYPD at a time. And I rose through the ranks, so I became a sergeant. First I was a cop, then I was a sergeant, then I was a lieutenant. So who's gonna stop me? If I'm driving and I'm drinking and I'm intoxicated, gotta get a captain to pull me over. Try to get out of jail free card. And so I was enabled a lot. And so I didn't have the experience of jails or institutions. My higher power was watching out for me. Because how many times could I have been in the police car or in my regular car, high, and not hit somebody, not kill somebody? How many times get into a car accident and be able to get away with it and not have to go to jail for that? So what happened was, and we went to the Viking cemetery, right? Thomas and Peter took us to the Viking cemetery. And there was this really cool Viking hat that Thomas put on my head. I asked him to, he just do it without me. But when I put that mask on, right? That mask, you don't have to see who I am. And that's what the NYPD was for me, for many years. Whether I was a lieutenant, and then I got my education, and I went on for more degrees, and had, letters in front of my name, and letters after my name, and I had so many different masks, so many different Viking masks that I wore. And the disease progressed. So I broke my shoulder, and I got into accidents, and it's a miracle that with all of that, I was able to actually still collect the pension. How did I not get caught at all of these things that I did? Now, I did a lot of good things. When we talk about the fourth step in a little while, I'm going to start talking about, when the journey began to recovery, and we talk about the fourth step, there are assets too. So I don't want to say that it was all bad stuff that I did in my 20-year career. I did some good stuff too. But because I suffered from the disease of addiction without recovery, not having recovery, and suffering from the disease of addiction, it's progressive, and it's fatal. And so where I was heading was either to an institution, a nut house, or jail, or death. No doubt about it. So fast forward to tape 2001. September 11th, 2001. My partner Chris and I are coming out of the Battery Tunnel in Brooklyn, and it's right there at the mouth of the World Trade Center. So on September 11th at about 8:45, the first plane had already hit. I was a lieutenant at the time, I was still on the job, and I was driving a police car. It was an unmarked car. When it came out, we saw that the first plane had hit. And because of my education and because of being a lieutenant and working for community affairs, I was in a position where I was able to actually work with families of the victims. So I did that for a year. Went to ground zero every single day for about 4.5 hours every day. And I can stand here today and say that was beautiful work. That I was blessed to be able to do that work. But at the time, I saw myself as a victim. And I was injured here. And that's when I started to get introduced to prescription medication. And you see again, I had to get out of jail free card. See, I didn't have to go on the street to a dealer to get sleeping pills, to get Xanax, to get pain medication for the root canals that I had because I was grinding my teeth at night so bad from the PTSD and the depression and the anxiety. See, I had like all of these now reasons to use. So not only was my disease now full bloom. But I had a psychiatrist, our literature talks about it. We tried everything. Psychiatry, religion, right? We tried it all. By the time I retired, 2003, I had a wonderful partner. We had been together at that point for many years. Had a house, had my family in my life, never went to jail, didn't go to treatment, and yet I hated my life. So I would wake up in the morning from 2003, actually from 2001, but it started to progress and get worse and worse because now I was using so much liquid chemicals, pill form chemicals, mixing everything, trying more doses, trying to mix this with that. Maybe if I saw this psychiatrist, maybe if I saw that therapist. And we did geographics too. So we felt like maybe it's New York. Maybe I gotta get out of New York. So we moved to Pennsylvania. And it never stopped raining. And then in the winter, it never stopped snowing. So like maybe, and we did this over, again, chemicals. We made a decision to move to Florida. Because maybe it's the sun that I need. By 2006, I contemplated on a daily basis taking my revolver and blowing my brains out. Something stopped me. I don't know if it was vanity, not wanting to have my partner find me like that. Higher power had a plan. On January 7, I would wake up every morning when I was in Florida. Sun was shining, wonderful partner, wonderful home, pension from the NYPD. I teach college. Not me, right? No, the disease of addiction, it's about negative thinking. It's about perspective. It's about not loving your life even though things are great. It's about not being able, actually being incapable of living life on life's terms. So every morning when I would wake up and I would open my eyes, I would be, why am I still alive? How is it possible that I could still be alive after all of that using, mixing stuff, hallucinating? I couldn't believe that. Why, God? Why? Why am I still alive? Afraid to die, afraid to have the courage to pull the trigger. But January 7th, I opened my eyes that morning and I heard an inner voice that said, you have to stop using. Had to stop. Now I had been introduced to Narcotics Anonymous from my sister who has 15 years of recovery. No, 18 years of recovery. And her sponsor is somebody who you know. Vincent, he was here last year, I think. And so I had been introduced to Narcotics Anonymous a long time ago when she invited me to go to one of her anniversaries. And it was in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, in a really bad neighborhood. And I remember thinking, you're not an addict. I use way more than you. You're not an addict. And she invited me to come, and Vincent gave her medallion. And I remember walking into that meeting and thinking, I locked up half of the room, I think. What's the purpose here? My sister doesn't belong here. And I certainly don't belong here. But I heard the message. I heard it. Vincent. I'll never forget Vincent and some of the stuff that he said. So I knew there was a place to go. So January 7th, 07, now I had been using it every single day, and no matter what, whether I was sick or not, it had stopped working for me. I don't know if anybody can relate, but it stopped working for me. And I was forcing myself. But it didn't have what it had anymore. It was the last block on the last house on the block for me, they said, And jails, institutions, and that, they're not part of my story yet. They're not part of my story yet. But when I start to talk to you about this journey, this amazing, magical journey that has happened to me, it's amazing. It's a miracle. What's happened to me is a miracle. And if this addict could stop using, lose the desire to use, and find a new way to live, anybody can. Because I'm living proof of it. This point, I'll tell you the journey. It's been a beautiful journey. When I wake up in the morning today, I rattle off a gratitude list. I say these 10 amazing things that I'm grateful for. I say why I'm grateful for them. That didn't happen before recovery. That did not happen to me before recovery. Recovery is the only reason why I wake up in the morning and don't want to die. And you have to understand that nothing has changed. Circumstances haven't changed. Material things haven't changed. Nothing's changed. Same house, same partner, same pension, same job. Nothing has changed except my new perspective on my life. That's the beauty of this thing. You have to put the drugs down first. And that was not easy for me. So January 7th, 07, told my sister, didn't use that day, because that's my clean day, and it still continues to be my clean day. But I told my sister, she came down to Florida, and I told her I want to go into the program. I didn't go into treatment. I wanted to go into Narcotics Anonymous. Because I said, she could do it, I could do it. She said, let's go to a meeting. I said, how do you know there's a meeting in Florida? How do you know that? If you live in New York, how do you know where there's a meeting in Florida? She's like, internet. So later that night, she said, okay, we're going to go to the meeting. I said, you know what? I don't know if I'm ready for that. Maybe, because, it's like, I knew from her, I knew from Vincent, I knew that this is the real deal. Like, you don't do this kind of thing halfway. Like, you do it all the way. I felt like I was going to jump off of a cliff if I went to a meeting. She said, well, I'm going to a meeting. I'd like you to come with me. I said, okay. So I went to a meeting, I raised my hand, we had a key tag. The miracles of place. Because I see people come in there today. I see it. I see people come in there, raise their hand, they get a white key tag, but then they don't come back, or they don't do some of it. Which suggestions do you want to do? Oh, some of them. So I don't attribute this to me. I attribute this to a higher power. I had to get honest. I had to admit that I had the disease of addiction. I didn't like that one. I didn't like that. I kept arguing with people. I don't like this disease model. What does that mean? Like, always going to be an addict? Like, what does that mean? I didn't like it. I had to get with it. I had to get with step one. I had to admit that I had a disease. And that the only treatment for this is a thing called Narcotics Anonymous. Period. And on top of it, some of the front staff and some of the people about, gym membership, and Peter, for me, it's not enough to just have a gym membership. You gotta go and you gotta work out and you gotta sweat, so you gotta do the work. So I had a step one in my life. I came to Narcotics Anonymous, raised my hand, admitted I was powerless over the disease of addiction, and that my life had become unmanageable. So when I got a sponsor, and the sponsor had me list all the unmanageability. Because I was listening to people in the media that's shooting heroin, and smoking crystal meth, and I'm like, I didn't do that. I'm not an addict then. Okay, yeah, let's do this. Write a list. Let's write a list and see all of the things that happen to you. All of the horrible, shameful, gross, disgusting, almost lost your job, almost went to jail things. What do you think if you got like 100 things? 100 unmanageability items. Okay, maybe I'm suffering from the disease of addiction. Oh, okay. And then, better still, the basic text. Reading the basic text and oh my God, you're like, who wrote this? How did they know that that's what I think in my head? Because that's what I think in my head. It's always about the negativity. It's always about the fear. I'm always afraid of the worst thing that's going to happen. It's always about the anger because I'm not getting my way. It's always about the resentment because I don't have the nerve and honesty to just tell you right how I'm feeling right now. So hold on to it. And then I'll light myself on fire and hope that the smoke burns you and gets you upset. I read in the basic text about 1 is too many, 1,000 is never enough. And then I remember, not only does this apply in my life to chemicals, because, if it's like the doctor says take 2, the floor's probably going to really work then. And if it's money every 2 hours, every hour, it's going to be better. It'll happen even faster. And not just in chemicals, but in a lot of aspects of my life. In Florida, we suffer with a thing called termites. There's this unit there. And then every once in a while they'll swarm, so you'll see some, termite rings. And when you see those termite rings, you gotta do something about it. Gotta get rid of them. So I went on the internet, and I found this thing, this spray. So I bought a whole case of it. I still have 99 bottles. Always afraid I'm going to run out. What's that? That's the disease of addiction. That's the compulsive, obsessive thinking. It's the filling the void with the outside things. Basic text talks about if only I had, right? If only I had the money, if only I had the relationship, if only I had the son, if only I had a higher power. Step 2. Come to believe in a power greater than yourself. Not as going to restore you to sanity, because I'm still insane. But could restore you to sanity. So I have 90 days clean. And I have a temporary sponsor, and he's annoying. He's annoying because he's telling me things to do, and I don't like being told what to do. Don't you know who I am? I'm Lieutenant in NYPD. Are you kidding me? They're telling me what to do? One of my character defects is arrogance. But my higher power's been working on that with me and giving me some opportunities. On this talks about get humiliated or get humiliated. And I'll tell you that story in a second. It's true. I had 90 days clean and made 90-90. They told me get a sponsor. I got a sponsor. I didn't like him, but I had him anyway. He told me to do step. I did step 1. I got 90 days clean. And on a real bender, I do a silent auction before it's clean. So using high, I do a silent auction and I win this trip I don't know, I got paid like $1,500 or something for it that was like worth maybe $700, but I kept on bidding on myself. I was so high, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I won the trip to Playa del Carmen in Mexico. Now, I've been using this since I'm 15 years old. I got 90 days clean. I had no business being in Playa del Carmen. No business. And if one of my sponsees had asked me, do you think it's okay if I go to Playa del Carmen? I would say no. I would say no. Well, and I'm learning as a sponsor now to not just be like that directive and just kind of let them decide on their own what's better for them. But my sponsor didn't stop me from going. He said, make sure you have a plan. Go to a meeting every day. In Mexico? They got meetings in Mexico? Are you kidding? So I did. I went to a meeting every day. It's probably the worst vacation we've ever had. Because it was all about, for me, the obsession. The obsession to use was incredible. It was so incredible that one of the days, and it's all I can think about, the obsession, the compulsion. And one of the days, we go to a meeting, and I take my partner with me, not in recovery, amazing support. We get to the meeting, we take a cab to the meeting, and there's no meeting. That's why it's so important, an area, to update the meeting list. Because an addict could be really needing a meeting, and if there's no meeting there, you don't know what's going to happen. And so now I left this location, get back in the cab, go back to the main street, and I'm shaking. I'm shaking, and I think I'm crying, I'm going to use. I don't know how to get sleep. But I remember hearing in a meeting about pray to her. Oh God, help me. Now I didn't have a phone, I couldn't call anybody. Oh God, help me. In English, God backwards is dog. So I'm walking down this main street and everybody's drinking and there's a pharmacy, and in Mexico you can just walk in without a prescription. So I already knew. I got Ativan, Xanax, some Ambien, sleeping pills. I could get whatever I want right now. And here's the pharmacy, here's me, and I look over and I see a guy, and I'm sure he's crowded like this. I look in this travel agency, and there's a guy from the meeting, and he sees me, and I want him, and he hugs me, and I tell him I want to use. I want to use, and he's like, what happened? What's going on? I said, I went to the meeting, they didn't have the meeting, now I think I want to use. He's like, we're having a meeting right now. You're alright. You don't have to use. You never have to use again. It came out of that clean. I went back. My sponsor told me to take a commitment of 30. I had 30 days at that point, so now I had like 90 days clean. Take a commitment. I did. I ran away my diseases like, well, I was a lieutenant in the NYPD, I'm a leader all the time, maybe I should look back. Maybe I should watch what's happening. Maybe I shouldn't, take a leadership role. But I didn't understand the traditions. This is not a leadership role, this is a service role. This isn't about, I'm gonna go like this down to you, this is gonna be up like this to you. So I took a service commitment. And then I got a sponsor, another sponsor, another sponsor. I was going through a lot of sponsors. I was dating. Because it's a fit. It's like whatever I believe that everything is about a higher power. I believe there's a divine plan. So the first time around, I did the 12 steps with a sponsor. And then I wanted and I felt and I knew I had to go further on my journey. And I totally needed a sponsor who lived in Florida, because I needed supervision. So I made a decision, and in step 3, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over. And I gotta tell you that the obsession to use did not lift right away for me. That's not my higher power's fault. It's not the fellowship's fault. It's not the 12 steps fault. It's because I didn't ask my higher power enough to have it lift. Because once I really prayed for it to lift, then it did. And then I was ready to go into a searching and fearless moral inventory. And in the 4th step, the second time around, because this is like an onion. You just keep peeling those layers, and you just keep discovering stuff about yourself. Fear and anxiety and resentment and anger and arrogance and all the things that I was kind of like, the way I would live my life day to day, and the way I would fight the world, because I always felt like I was fighting the world. I felt it was a battle, life on life's terms. And I felt like I was a victim. But in my 4th step and in the 5th step, admitting to God, to myself, and to somebody else, and for me it was my sponsor, I discovered that I wasn't a victim of my family's injury to me. I forgave them. I wasn't a victim. They were doing the best they could. They were only like 37 years old at the time. What do they know, 37? And they did the best they could. You know, and I walked around for a long time resenting that they threw me out. How do you do that? You don't even do that to a dog. How do you do that to your child? You throw your child out? But I was able through the 4th step and the 5th step to really just kind of let go. Put it down. Drop that rock. It's weighing it down. The only way that I'm able to open up my heart and love other people is by forgiving them and loving myself. And it was the 4th and the 5th step that I really learned about me. And I learned that I didn't need those masks. I didn't need that Viking helmet. I didn't need that. I didn't need to be lieutenant, doctor. I mean, I still struggle with that stuff. This is about progress, not perfection. I'm a work in progress. I'm much better than I was. Much better than I was. But I'm still not well. That's why I need to come to Narcotics Anonymous on a daily basis and work this program and not just have a gym membership. Because I really want to get better. And I always wanted to be a better person. So the 6th step, I have these defects. I have arrogance, but I know what that is. It's a cover, it's a mask. So I won't let you in. I know that. I realize that I'm a ghetto boy. I realize that I don't like rules. I was a rule enforcer, but I don't like to play by the rules. I want exceptions to be made. Like speeding. I still speed. I've been stopped by the same cop in my neighborhood 5 times. When he sees me, he says, "You again?" That's a defect. Again, though, we're not saints, it's about progress, not perfection. I want to tell you about the 8th step. I want to tell you about the 8th and the 9th step. In the 8th step, they talk about making a list of everybody that you harmed, right? And being willing to make amends to them all. So one of them that was on my list was the NYPD. Because I had no right stealing time from them. See, I used to justify it. Our literature talks about justification and rationalization. It's like 1 hour of my work is equivalent to their 8 hours of work. So if I just show up, I could just breathe in and out, and I earned my keep, kind of thing. Wow, no humility. No humility. So they were on my list to make amends to. and a whole slew of others. My mother. Because I resented what she did to me, and I made her suffer, and I punished her. So what I would do is when she would call and she'd leave a message, I wouldn't get back to her. How does that feel? Who's that hurting? It's hurting me, my spirit. So I made a menace to my mother. She didn't even know I had done anything. She didn't even know what was in my head. Now, I didn't put the IRS on my list. The IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, the government, taxes. I didn't put them on. And when I went over my list with my sponsor, I didn't even tell her about it. Because my sponsor is the kind of sponsor that if you tell her, now you're going to have to close that deal. I was afraid of that. I don't want to open up a can of worms. The way I read it was like, well, if it harms you, you shouldn't do it. See, that's why you have to have a sponsor, because your sponsor gives you direction. Walks you through the steps. My higher power thought it was in my best interest to put the IRS on the 8th step. Because when I was on my 9th step, I got audited. And so when I came home, I had a letter from the IRS that said that I was being audited. My old way of thinking, and this is with 3.5 years clean, my old way of thinking would have been, they have some nerve, why don't they pick on somebody else? Mitt Romney only pays 14%, right? So that all would have been my justification, rationalization. But when I got the letter, I'm not going to tell you that I didn't want to throw up, I did. And I felt like all the blood left my body, because I knew what I did. I knew what I did. This wasn't a mistake. I know what I did wrong. But if we're really honest, and we're really open, and we're really willing to find a new way to live, I had to go with this one. And so I did. And I owed like $20,000, $20,000. A lot of money. I'm on a payment plan. I'm making amends for the next 5 years. But I'm blessed that it was an accuracy penalty, not a fraud penalty. And this addict will always be thinking of comparing. I never did any burglaries, I never did any robberies, I never did that. I never did it. Number one, I never did it yet. I never did it yet. And number two, don't think you're so slick because, actually you have a little bit of greed, you have a little bit of, stealing in you have a little bit of thievery in you. Yeah, you got all of that. Don't make comparisons. Let's find the similarities. Let's relate to the feelings, not to the circumstances. Today I take a personal inventory. I try to take a personal inventory, not just at night. I try to take it as the day goes on. And I'm making amends to the people in my life as I go along. 3.5 years clean. I was working at a college, a community college. I was supposed to get tenure. See, I was supposed to get tenure. That means that you're permanent and you get a promotion. I thought I was doing everything right. But I got a letter in the mail that said I wasn't going to get it. And that meant that I was getting fired. I have a pension, but it's not enough. I needed to work full time. Not getting tenure meant getting fired. Immediately, I go to the defect of character of arrogance. Don't you know who I am? Have you not Googled my name and seen what I've done? What do you mean I'm not getting tenure? What do you mean I'm getting terminated? And I've been doing everything right. Steps, go to meetings, do service, have an HNI commitment. I'm clean. How come you're doing this to me? But one of the beautiful things about Narcotics Anonymous and one of the beautiful things about this program, what it's shown me, is that everything is a lesson for me. Like everything is a way for me to grow and get better. Because I am getting better one day at a time. And so I still don't know why that happened. They could never give me a reason, and they never did give me a reason. But God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. I call my higher power God for lack of a better word. So when I didn't attend, I thought, well, what do I want to be when I grow up then? And I kept asking my partner, and I kept asking my sponsor, why is this happening to me? What's the lesson? And they said, faith. One of the principles of the steps is faith. When we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over, and when we have an 11th step in our lives, through prayer and meditation, improving that conscious contact, then we know that all will be well no matter what. Like no matter what, it's going to be okay. So the bottom line is that here I am, that's 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, whatever it is. Everything is fine. Never missed a payment on my mortgage. Right away, the addict in me thinks I'm going to be homeless. They're going to take my house away. But the truth of the whole scenario, the truth of the whole story, the truth of this journey is that I was given hope when I walked into the doors of Narcotics Anonymous. The hope that any addict who seeks recovery can lose the desire to use, and I have. I never would have been able to come to Europe, to Denmark, and not be obsessive about using. Impossible. Not possible. Because the last time I was here, I went to Amsterdam and Munich, and I remember parts of it. And I remember having an argument with my partner. I remember hurting her feelings. I remember, because it always ended like that for me. It always ended nasty, and it always ended mean. I really wanted this to be a ninth step. I wanted this trip to kind of make up for all those other trips where I was using. And I was able to experience things that I never experienced before here. I was able to talk about a new perspective on my life. So it's raining. So what? So it's freezing. So what? I have a happiness today, and I'm going to close with this. I have no idea what time it is. Before I got clean, I was with our grandson, and we were in Newport, Rhode Island. And this was like right towards the time where I was really suicidal. And we were in this cookie store, and he was picking out a cookie. And some guy walks in that must have known the shop owner. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" And the guy said, "Oh, I'm walking on cloud 9. And I looked at him. I was like, I wanted to slap him. I was like, I'm walking on cloud. What does that mean? Who walks on cloud 9? Who's that happy? Because I'm not happy. And then when I came into the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, my very first meeting, my second meeting, my third meeting, I heard people talking about happy, joyous, and free. Happy, joyous, and free. You really wanted to slap them. Because the miracle hadn't happened yet. But there's a saying that we have around here, keep coming back. And don't leave before the miracle. Because I'm here to tell you that not only is the promise true, that I've lost the desire to use, the obsession to use is lifted, but I have found a new way to live. And I am today, because of Narcotics Anonymous, and the fellowship, and the steps, and the principles of living the steps, I am today happy, joyous, and free. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please help us improve our ranking so others can find us by putting a review on Stitcher, iTunes, or your favorite podcast index. NAPOD is ad-free thanks to the folks supporting the show with $1 or more per month. If you enjoy listening, you can join them by going to napod.xyz and looking for the donate link. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.